Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Rock and roll pioneers Jay and the Americans rock Ram's Head in Annapolis, Maryland next Thursday, August 25th. I spoke to founding member Sandy Dean about hits like Come a Little Bit Closer, which was introduced to a new generation in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. He also discusses how the band helped to launch other artists from Neil Diamond to Steely Dan.
My name is Sandy Dean, and I'm one of Jay and the Americans.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us, Sandy.
Hey, it's a pleasure. We love coming to your area. Well, first of all, we've played there several times, but, we travel a lot. And some towns are just cooler than others. And Annapolis is a really cool little town. It's quaint, but it's got a lot of nice places. The place we play, the Ram's Head, is pretty famous within our community of performers. Everybody enjoys playing there. The food is great. The place is intimate. The audience gets an up close chance to kind of be with you and see you. And we get a chance to be up close and personal with the audience. We like that.
It is a really cool spot. Do you ever get to do any, eat Maryland crabs or any of that, the
Oh, yeah.
stuff?
We're East Coast guys, so we're big seafood eaters, and we love coming to your area for that.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, you mentioned that you're East Coast guys, and you've been with them from the very beginning. So tell me about how Jay and the Americans formed. Where was it?
It started in Brooklyn. Okay, we all grew up in Brooklyn, and in Brooklyn there were three things that you did: you either played ball, sang, or got into trouble. And we did all three. So we had a lot of friends that had groups, and we all used to kind of compete with each other on the street corners and in schoolyards and in bathrooms and in storefronts. It was one of the things that you did, it was a rite of passage in growing up. And there was so many different groups on the street corners, and we would have contests, and we would always go home feeling a little bit, well, those guys were better than us. And we would go and work harder to be better than them the next time. But it was just a fun experience. We all listened to the radio. We all saved our allowance to go buy 45s, and listen to the music on the radio, on AM radio. And then we would practice those songs on the streets ourselves, see how close we could come to duplicating what they were doing at the time. And we kind of developed our own style. And we had, I had a group in high school. I moved away from Brooklyn to Queens, to Rockaway, and formed a group. And out of that group, a couple of us reformed a different group that became Jay and the Americans.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it was near, when you mentioned the Rockaway, which is right near Bell Harbor, and weren't you originally called the Harbor Lights?
Yeah, that was the first group that we got a record deal with. That was myself, Kenny Rosenberg, who was Kenny Vance in the Planetones, and my girlfriend, Sidel, who went to high school with me. And we were the Harbor Lights. We got a record deal. Cousin Brucey played it on the air. We won the contest for the new record. And we were the local heroes in Rockaway. But then we got tired, wanted an all-guys group. So we formed a group which later became Jay and the Americans.
And the J was John J. Trainer at first, right?
Correct.
But then there was another J Black. So explain how there was the two J's. So in case maybe our younger listeners don't realize, there was actually two different J's.
The first J, when we auditioned with our guys group, they wanted to name us Binky Jones and the Americans. And Jay didn't want to be called Binky Jones. And we thought the name was ridiculous. So we got them to let them call us Jay, because that was a name that we could live with. We auditioned for two guys named Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller. Very famous record producer, songwriter guys. They wrote Hound Dog. They wrote Kansas City. They wrote Ruby Baby.
Oh, yeah.
They wrote all of the Drifters hits, pretty much. All of the Coasters hits. And we were thrilled to be with them. And by being with them, we kind of learned how to make records because they were making hits all over the place.
Lieber and Stoller, you're saying?
Yeah, they were just hit record producers. They were the first independent record producers in the business, and it was before Motown.
Oh yeah.
So they had all of these hit records, and we were thrust into the middle of all of these major artists and hit songwriters. So we kind of were the new kids on the block, and we learned how to make a hit record in the recording studio, so that when we eventually left them and went on our own, we kind of knew what we were doing. We kind of knew about picking songs, what makes a hit song, and how to make a hit record. And we owe it to them. They were the guys who we observed and watched and learned from. But it was a great experience. It was like going to rock and roll college, being in their office.
Yeah, and in that college, you don't yakety yak talk back to the teacher.
No, not at all. I mean, we were so in awe of them when we walked in. And the first day we walked into their office, we met the Coasters, we met the Drifters, wow. And they were our heroes. I mean, they were big stars already, and we were teenagers just crossing our fingers that we would get a shot at this.
Yeah. Well, you got your shot. You got your shot. Because you're signed for that first album deal. What is it? I guess United Artists.
Well, we got signed for a single deal. We made singles first. Okay. The first record we made was Tonight from West Side Story.
Oh, nice.
In conjunction with the release of the film on United Artists. And that was the label that Lieber and Stoller signed us to. So we made that record, and thank goodness it did enough business that they gave us a second recording session. And that's where we recorded a song called Dawning. And the backside was She Cried.
And She Cried was huge.
Yeah, that broke the record. That record broke for us. And that put us on the map. And then after that, we had a couple of sessions where nothing happened. And the singles came out and bombed. And Jay Traynor got a little impatient and felt he was getting offers to be a solo artist. So he wanted to go off on his own. And that happened. And that's how we found David Blatt. So we replaced Jay Traynor with Jay Black. And then we ran off about 10 hit singles.
Oh yeah, definitely. So real quick before we move to that, tell me, do me a slightly deeper dive into She Cried. Why do you think that one captured listeners' imagination? So why do you think it was such a big one?
I think that She Cried was the first record where a guy wasn't singing about a girl breaking his heart, but was singing about him breaking up with his girlfriend and breaking her heart.
So feeling bad and guilty about breaking someone else's heart.
Happened. And it kind of captured the imagination of the teenagers, because it was like a reverse. It also was a very dramatic record. It was slow, and it was a very drone-oriented kind of hypnotizing kind of sounding record. And it really was different from anything that had been out there at the time.
Wow. And it was later covered by the Shangri-Las. I mean, I think even Aerosmith did a version of it. Like,
the Letterman had a hit with it in Europe too.
Who did?
The Letterman.
Oh, nice. Wow. Yeah. So multiple different people had hits with it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, then, as you say, that's when Jay Traynor left, and then David Black comes in and I guess changes his name to Jay Black, because you have to. If you're Jay and the Americans, you got to be a Jay. So he comes in.
Yeah, we weren't going to be Dave and the Americans. It was too ethnic, Dave and the Americans.
Yeah, you needed to have Jay. Yeah, it had to stay with Jay and the Americans.
Yeah.
Well, as a Jay son myself, I appreciate that, the Jay. All right, cool. Well, all right. So then after that, like you said, with the new lineup solidified there, then you start rattling off like a bunch of hits. And I think, the very next album, She Cried was the first album, but the second one was Come a Little Bit Closer. And that title track might be the most famous song that Jay and the Americans ever put out. But any good stories about recording that one?
Yeah, it's funny because, the Come a Little Bit Closer almost didn't happen. Because when you recorded in the old days, it was a 3-song session. You went in, you tried to get 3 songs done, in a 3-hour session. Lay down 3 tracks and do 3 vocals. We got the 3 tracks done in 2.5 hours. We were really well rehearsed, so we had a half an hour left over. And the guy said to us, we got a half an hour free studio time. All the musicians are here. Have you got anything that you've been working on that we don't know about? And we hadn't planned on doing it in the session. So we said, yeah, we got something. And we started doing Come a Little Bit Closer, kind of impromptu in the studio, teaching the musicians the track, to lay down the track. And we got it done in a half an hour. It was real fast. Jay Black really didn't believe in the song. He didn't think it was a hit. And he was kind of angry when UA decided to release that as the single, because he thought one of the other songs was a much better fit. And the record came out. He called the company yelling, why did you release that stupid record? We don't want to, that's, why did you do that? And they said, well, it's 19 with a bullet next week. And he said, okay, never mind. And hung up the phone. And that's how Come a Little Bit Closer came to happen.
Wow. And I think it went all the way, almost topped the charts. I think it went to what, like maybe number 3 or something like that?
Well, it was 3 in one and 2 in another,
Yeah.
It was a huge record internationally as well.
Do you remember which dastardly songs or artists that you were trading that top slot with back then? Do you remember which one?
Well, yeah, some guys from England that we played a show with at the Washington Coliseum called the Beatles.
You may have heard of them.
Yeah, I heard of them.
I'm glad you mentioned the Washington Coliseum. A lot of people forget that was one of their first shows right after that one. Ed Sullivan.
That was their first trip here. And they took the train back to New York City and then did the Sullivan show after that. But it's really strange that through that whole British rock revival thing, that British invasion, as they call it, there were only a few groups that got airplay that were American, because anybody that was English got instant airplay. The American groups were struggling. We were one of them. The Four Seasons were one of them. The Beach Boys were one of them. I think Gary Puckett and the Union Gap was one of them. And there were few and far between that got airplay during that time. 63, 64, 65 was a tough time for American groups to break. If we hadn't already been partially successful,
right,
we wouldn't have gotten airplay at all. So
did you think about changing your name to Jay and the British?
Yeah, well, you know what? It's either beat them or join them. We decided to wave the flag and stay with it.
I'm glad you stayed, Jay and the Americans. Hey, one more really tidbit before we move off of Come a Little Bit Closer, because it's such a famous song. Did you find that a whole new generation discovered it when they put it in one of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that flipped me out. It turns out that the producer and director of that movie, James Gunn, I think his name is.
Yeah, that's his name.
He was a fan. And he had a group back in the 60s as well, which is why he's so well versed in all of that music. And if you listen to the soundtracks of all 3 of the Guardians of the Galaxy, he's got some pretty esoteric stuff, but it's really good. His soundtrack's a classic. And I'm proud to be on that with that record.
Yeah, what's really cool about that is, there's literally a whole other generation that's watching it just because they love superheroes, and suddenly they're getting an education on all these either really famous classic rock songs or, like you're saying, some esoteric stuff, and they probably download the whole thing, and now it's on everybody's phones.
Now it's part of their soundtrack.
Right, exactly. Well, do you remember what scene that Come a Little Closer was in? I can't remember. Yeah,
it's the scene where I think there's an arrow flying and killing all of these people.
Oh, okay. Yeah, in the second one.
A Little Bit Closer plays from beginning to, there's not like a snippet. It's the whole record. And James Gunn did something brilliant. At the end, he added a symphonic orchestra playing at the end of Come a Little Bit Closer that really isn't on the original record. And when I heard it, I absolutely fell down. I mean, brilliant what he does. He's a brilliant guy. But you can tell he loves the music. You can tell how he presents it in his film.
Yeah, well, it was awesome. He did you all a service, and he did music history a service by keeping that, that song around, and a lot of songs actually. It's pretty awesome.
He did a lot. He did some great stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm looking forward to hearing the next soundtrack.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I remember it now. It was like an arrow flying all through. Yep, I remember it. All right, cool. Well, back to enough of James Gunn. The movies were great, but back to Jay and the Americans. Maybe time for what, one or two more. What's another? Oh, how do you even say it? Is it Caramia?
Yeah.
Stories of behind the scenes recording it.
Well, actually, that's when Jay Black came to audition to take over the Jay spot. He was singing in a duo at the time with Marty, one of the Americans, knew him. He was a neighbor, and a duo that they had played with for a long time in Brooklyn called the Two Chaps. And Dave Blatt was a great mimic. He could imitate a lot of other vocalists' voices. And he heard this record by David Whitfield, who was an English kind of a semi-opera guy, and he had put Caramia out, and Jay used to sing it with Marty. So when he came to audition, we said, sing something that shows your voice off, because everybody's got a little place that they think is special for their voice. And he sang a version of Caramia to us because he had played it with Marty. So when he auditioned, Marty said, let me play you something we do. And he hit the one chord, and Jay started blasting his voice out, singing this song. And it was so overpowering that we all looked at each other and said, wow, that's totally different from the other Jay. Jay Traynor was a crooner and a stylist. This was like having Pavarotti sing lead for you all of a sudden.
Right.
But it was very impressive. And you couldn't help but say, that's really special. And we got behind it, we rearranged it, fixed it up, and made a version of it that we sang in our live show. And the record companies all laughed at us when we said, well, we want to record this, because everywhere we play it live, people go nuts. And they said, that can't be, that's not a hit. That's not a rock and roll record. You can't have a hit with that. Well, finally, we had enough hit singles and enough clout to say, we insist we want to record this record. So they let us record it. And of course, again, they put it out as a B-side just to kind of satisfy us on the next single. And what happened was we got to do, because the Sammy Davis Jr. liked us, and he was guest hosting The Tonight Show. The Tonight Show never had rock artists on. And De Cordova, who was the guy who booked the show, was dead set against having anything rock and roll on The Tonight Show. And Sammy said, listen, I want to have these guys on. I said, no, we don't have rock guys on. And Sammy said, well, if you don't let them come on with me, I don't want to guest host the show.
Wow.
So Cordova said, okay, you can have them on. Now, we were supposed to do the side that UA was pushing, the flip side of the record. But when we got there, we handed out the sheet music to Doc Severinsen for Caramia without saying anything to the record company.
Wow.
And they played it, and we sang it live on the show. And the phones lit up at NBC wouldn't stop lighting up, asking about where they could buy the record.
Wow. So you sort of flipped it at the last second on live TV.
So the record company got smart and said, wow, we better try this out. And they reversed it and flipped the record over and put out the next set of the demos that they sent to the record companies, to the radio stations. And all of a sudden, the new release was, instead of the B-side, which was Caramia, it was the A-side. And that's how Caramia came to be a hit record.
So it was supposed to be When It's All Over, but they flipped it to Caramia?
Yeah.
Wow. And just so our listeners know, Cara Mia is Italian for my beloved. So
Yes.
awesome. Well, that's a really, really cool story, and that's really cool that Sammy Davis freaking Jr. went to bat for Jay and the Americans.
Yeah, he was our guy. He loved us. We played Forest Hills Tennis Stadium with him, and that's where we met him. And he heard Jay and us sing Cara Mia, and he went nuts. He thought that was such a cool thing. He couldn't believe that kids from Brooklyn were singing this song, and the way we harmonized and the way Jay sang that lead and hit those notes, he was super impressed. And so we became really good friends and hung out a lot. And that's how he got us on the Tonight Show. So kind of our rabbi,
Yeah, that's so cool. Did you mentioning Sammy Davis Jr.? Did you get to hang with any of the other Rat Pack, Sinatra, Dean Martin, any of them?
No, Sammy was good enough for us.
I'd say
Yeah.
there was a really good documentary they made about Sammy a couple years ago.
We went to dinner at Sammy's place in New York, and my Brit was serving dinner. So it was kind of cool that we hung out with him like that. He was a fabulous guy.
It's really, really cool. Were there any now you talking about Sammy Davis Jr. Is it maybe sidetracking me or maybe sparking a good conversation as far depending how you want to look at it. But were there any other, Sammy Davis Jr. is a superstar. Was there any other massive singers or hell, even actors or something that just the fame of the Jay and the Americans got you to move in circles with that you could like you're sitting there, can't believe I'm sitting here with this person?
Yeah. We went on a tour. We went on tour with Roy Orbison.
Awesome.
And we got tight with him. And he also, we were super impressed with him, and he was super impressed with us. I mean, it's a wonderful thing when you admire somebody and you get the love coming back. We both were not familiar with each other. He was a Southern gentleman, and we were like the Dead End Kids from Brooklyn. And we hooked up on this tour. And we would watch him in the wings every night, and he would blow us away, and he would watch us every night and get blown away. And so by the time the tour was over, we were just really tight with being friends, more than just musically. We just cared about each other. And so to this day, we always make sure we do a couple of Roy songs in our live show as a tribute to him. And we recorded a big hit of his because of that.
Crying, right?
We had Crying, which went top 20. And we always dedicate it to Roy because it's his song,
And God, the way he sang it too, the cry.
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh God.
Yeah.
Give you goosebumps.
Yep.
But so that's great. So yeah, you covered Roy Orbison's Crying, and I think a couple years after that you covered This Magic Moment by the Drifters, and that you bring you full circle back to your Lieber and Stoller.
Yep, absolutely. And we stayed friends with Charlie Thomas forever from the Drifters. He was a good buddy. Who else did we get tight with?
Well, Neil Diamond wrote Sunday and Me for you, but you released that originally.
Yeah. He wrote Sunday and Me. That was the beginning. We tried to sign him as an artist when he sang it for us. And he said, nah, I'm too shy. I couldn't be a performer. I just want to write songs.
He didn't think he would make it on his own, and now look at him.
He was kind of introverted and kind of shy, but he found his way.
Yeah, I would say so.
Like, you got that stage fright,
Yeah, exactly. Well, hey, at least you guys got a good song out of it first. And then I'm looking through. I mean, you had a bunch more than a lot of people were. I mean, you Walking in the Rain, you did a version of that the Ronettes famously did that version.
That's because we dated the Ronettes when we used to do the Murray the K show.
You said you dated them.
We loved the Ronettes. Yeah, they were. We loved them. Yep, absolutely.
Oh wow, yeah. I mean, we just lost Ronnie.
Yeah, that was a big loss. She was a super spectacular girl. She had a real rough time too. She had a lot of things to overcome, but She was the survivor, and she had one of the most identifiable voices. I mean, I loved her voice. You know, she could turn baby into a symphony, just singing the word baby.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Rest in peace. I mean that
Yeah,
be my baby is just an all timer. Ronnie Spector or Veronica Bennett, I guess is as she used to be known.
yeah. And
But
Nedra was my girl.
who say again?
I said Nedra was my girl.
Ah, okay.
Right.
So each bandmate dated a different member of the Ronettes. Well, that's really cool. So you went walking in the rain together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, good stuff. Good stuff. And it's all who would have known that it all started with doing a West Side Story cover of Tonight, and then later you did the South Pacific song, Some
Yeah,
Enchanted Evening. So you can do
yeah.
it all.
Well, we try not to get boxed into a predictable next record. We just felt that a hit song is a hit song. It's got to have a great lyric and a great melody. And then you arrange it however you feel it should be arranged for your particular style of singing. You know,
Yeah.
great songs always stick through. And that's the approach that we always took. And if we heard a song that we loved, whether nobody had done it before or somebody else had done it before, we approached it like it was a new piece of material and did it our way. And that was the formula for our success. You know, we grew up in New York where there were a million radio stations, and there was a Latin station, there was a country station, there was a blues, rhythm and blues station, there was a jazz station, and we listened to pretty much all of it. Plus, there was Broadway theater, you know? So we were exposed to a lot of different styles of music. And even though we started out snapping our fingers doing doo-wop, we evolved into something else. We evolved into a pop group that had the influences of all the stuff we listened to. You know, there's a lot of Latin in Come a Little Bit Closer,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of Latin even in Let's Lock the Door, you know, which was the follow-up record. But all these records were different. She Cried, Broadway show stuff. We never closed the door to anything that we thought was terrific. And that was our formula. And we stuck with it.
Awesome. Well, all the fans over the years are glad that you did stick with it, and that you stayed Jay and the Americans, even with withstanding the British invasion.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's been great talking with you. But before we run, final seconds, like when all of this music history that we've been talking about, when all this music history is written someday, and you and me and all of us are long gone, how do you want Jay and the Americans to be remembered against all the other bands that you mentioned, Beatles, Beach Boys, etc., but Ronettes? What is your little slice of the pie, you think, that made you all unique?
I think it was the big vocal with the interesting harmonies. I think that we laid the groundwork for a lot of the groups that followed us. You know, like we listened when we were kids, and we listened to great harmony groups like the Four Freshmen, you know, guys that did brilliant stuff and interesting stuff that wasn't the same as everybody else. I hope that, studying our music for the new people that come along, if they get something from it and add it to their repertoire, like we added, all of the stuff that we listen to on the radio to our making of our music, that'll be a testimonial. We had two guys that we started off called, they became Steely Dan, Donald Fagen and Walter Becker. And they came into our office and they played some songs that they had written, and we knew how good they were. And they didn't know what to do with themselves. So we signed them on, and we signed them as songwriters, but you also used them as our bass player and our keyboard player.
Wait, you're saying Steely Dan members were in Jay and the Americans for a while?
Oh, yeah. We started those guys off.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, Donald and Walter started off with us as our keyboard and bass player. Wow. For about 3 years till they got to form Steely Dan. And one of our boyhood buddies, Gary Katz, took them with him to California and got them signed to ABC Dunhill as songwriters. And then nobody could sing their songs because their songs were so unique. So Gary formed a group, and they just said, "Oh, if nobody else can sing our songs, we better put a group together." And they put a group together, and that was Steely Dan.
Wow,
So,
I had no idea. Well, then maybe our listeners learned a fun trivia, because I had no idea that they spun off of being with you all. So there you go.
Yep.
Well, thank you for reeling in the years with us here for a good half hour or whatever. It's great. It's to talk to someone, a legend, like, I mean, you guys are in the Vocal Group Hall of Fame. I mean, you guys are a legendary band, so this is great.
Well, when you come to the show, you'll hear us sing "Reeling in the Years" because that's part of our history too.
Ah, well, so you didn't get that idea from my bad joke just now. You already had it in the set.
Absolutely, it's been in our set for years.
Well, that's cool. And then in between the songs, you go up to the microphone and you can tell the story about the Steely Dan guys. You can tell the story about Neil Diamond. You can tell all these stories because you've met them all. It's great.
Yeah, well, that's part of the fun of doing the show. It's letting the people know how it all happened.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for telling us at least a sliver of how it all happened. But there's so much more material that you got to come out to the Ram's Head in Annapolis, Maryland, to hear all the great stories and hear all the great songs. Again, everyone, it's Jay and the Americans. It's going to be Ram's Head on August 25th. 2 shows, 6:30 and a 9 o'clock show. So 2 times. So, hey, thanks so much for doing this, Sandy. This was awesome.
We had fun.
Awesome. Well, we'll see you in Annapolis.
Take care.
Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Our theme music is Scott Buckley's Clarion. Remember to give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time. I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the DC area is great, and Podcast DC gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast DC.